Hello everyone, this is part 16 of What If Naruto Was Betrayed and Planned It All, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Oki hefted a large broadsword over his shoulder. That blade was as 1.5 as long as his body and as wide as his midsection. The entirety of the metal was pitch black with a crimson edge. He turned to the entire village standing there, ready to leave the village with him. He let out a heavy breath and looked at those beside him. Shina, Douglas, Genkaku, Kuro, Skull, Balalaika, Fu, Crow, and Kichigai. I do thank you all for deciding to fight alongside me. So now, I must take my leave of you. Oki said. He activated an explosive and collapsed the entrance, as well as every other. Before anyone could start trying to clear it away, he placed his hand on the boulders and sealed the entire village behind a barrier. What the hell are you doing? Fu shouted, trying to grab Oki. Balalaika grabbed her. He rounded on her and stared her down. I will not allow them all to fight. Most of them are little more than civilians. The seal will disappear upon my death or upon my return. Now come on. We have a war to get to. Break. Naruto stood aboard one of the drop ships ready to move in as soon as he gave the signal. He was scared somewhat. Even though they had the statue hidden away, Black Zetsu had been making White Zetsu for decades. He knew what he was about to do wouldn't be enough, so fear had set in. Finally he gave a sigh. Azukiage to Bahamut. Fire the main cannon and immediately start releasing landing ships. Naruto said. A few seconds passed before he felt his ship shake and start to descend. There was a loud explosion. He looked out of a window and saw that where the Bahamut's guns had hit, the ground was starting to collapse. As the ground finally stopped moving, he thought that might have been it, nothing on the ground giving any signs that there was anything alive. Then he saw it. At first it was just a trickle of them from between stones. And then, all at once, the entire ground started being covered in white zetsu as they poured from the ground. Then he also realized that the ship was about to land. It was about to begin. He walked up to the door and opened it, allowing the whipping wind to enter the craft. Looking down, a lump formed in his tea. He swallowed it and jumped, quickly landing on the ground. He blocked a punch from one of the white zetsu pouring from the tunnels. He had expected many, but not the horde that was enveloping his forces as rapidly as they landed. He delivered a kick that the top half of his opponent from the bottom half. Drawing his sword, he went about hacking apart every enemy he could. There was a small reprieve as a blast of fire took out several dozen of them. He looked over to see Itachi. We will try to keep fighting them. I'll try to keep from using the Susanoo so we don't have to worry about our forces getting in the way. You go and see if you can't see. Naruto nodded at Itachi's words and started ducking through the zetsu towards the cave. As he see through any that got in his way. He weaved through the crowd, Anko landing beside him as they went. You're going after Kabuto? She asked. Yes. You want to handle him? I do, but I can't handle him on my own. You don't mean? Yeah. When we find him, do it. He eventually saw one of the key targets. Kabuto. He then saw Kabuto moving through several hand seals. He tried to move forward to stop him, but it was too late. Coffins started rising from the ground and opened to reveal several shinobi from different eras. Naruto shouted. He started flying through his own hand seals. May the world forgive me for what I'm about to unleash. Kinkaku and Ginkaku leapt into the air and were about to attack the Azu 5 before a massive wall of snakes blocked their assault. There was a sound of dark laughing for a moment. So you brought me back, boy. Bold move. The snakes retracted rapidly up the sleeves of Orochimaru's shirt. Orochimaru. I don't like saying it, but I need your help. I need you to deal with your disciple. Naruto said as he landed next to the Sannin. Orochimaru looked around before he saw Kabuto walking towards them. Kabuto. So you have changed quite a bit in my absence. Kabut smirked and held his arms up so the sleeves fell and showed his arms. What do you think, Lord Orochimaru? The Sannin laughed. Honestly, I'm a bit underwhelmed. Kabuto did a double take at that. I'll leave you two alone, Naruto said before taking off to continue fighting. What do you mean underwhelmed? I've perfected the Edo Tensei. I have even gone so far as to do what you never could. I've gained the Sage Mode. Orochimaru gave a slight hum in thought. That is impressive, but far less than I expected of you. I expected you to have done quite a bit more with yourself. With all my research and limitless potential. But instead you serve Zetsu. Not only an old member of the Akatsuki, but a mere shadow of a long since gone person's will. I'm not his servant. Then where is Black Zetsu? You stand here and fight alongside his army, but where is he? Shut up. You were Kaiser easily. But with his help I was able to become far more powerful than you. Oh, more powerful than me. You forget yourself in the presence of your teacher. Or have you forgotten? I've forgotten nothing. Now I shall show exactly how far I have surpassed you. Kabuto then threw off his cloak to show his body change. Horns grew on his head and the body of a snake grew from his belly. Orochimaru smiled. What a neat trick, Kabuto. But not enough to stop me. In a blur, several hundred snakes appeared and swarmed Kabuto. Kabuto's body changed as he rapidly moved to escape. As he dodged another wave of snakes, he moved through several hand signs. Sage art, inorganic reincarnation. The ground came to life and tore through the snakes before going after Orochimaru himself. Orochimaru brought up a single Rashomon that disrupted the ground momentarily, allowing him to maneuver through the living ground. Kabuto was about to prepare another jutsu before another wall of snakes came at him from behind. He moved to avoid it, only catching the katana at the last second. The blade went through his old body as he coughed up a new one and moved off to the side. He then moved into a crouching position in time to see Anko behind him and Orochimaru in front of him just before the ground erupted around him. He knew one thing. He needed to get underground where he had the advantage. Zabuza, on the other side of the battlefield, cleaved through several enemies before realizing that some of the Zetsu were becoming those they got too close to. He started shouting orders to the other ninja swordsmen and some of the forces under his command. Keep them back. Kiss 'em, Chojuro. Keep them away with jutsu. Don't let them get the chakra from your blades. Large explosions of water were the response to his orders. Searing migraine. Hurricanes of fire blazed across the field as Kakazu, who had been recovered from Taki during Sugetsu's raid, directed his hearts. Zabuza looked over to the now cleared area and gave a small nod to Kakazu that was returned. They then turned their attention to the battle as shards of ice of varying size, shape, and sharpness flew through the air at them. Haku, who was standing at Zabuza's side in an instant, brought up a large wall of his own ice. As the ice stopped flying, Haku brought down his wall. He was curious about who of his clan would have been brought back from the but he knew he could never have been prepared for what he saw in front of him. He saw others standing around her, previous members of the Swordsmen of the Mist, but it was only her he focused on. This woman is simple clothes, and long, dark black hair. He then calmed down once he took in every detail. Haku, you alright? Zabuza asked. A dragon of ice formed around Haku. Zabuza, direct the current swordsmen against the old. I'll handle this. You sure? Go. This is a family matter. Zabuza directed the swordsmen who broke off and started taking on the former generation. Haku simply stared the one in the center down. It figures they would bring back an ice user to fight alongside the previous ninja swordsmen as I do. Who are you? The woman asked. It figures you don't recognize me, mother. The last time you saw me was when you refused to kill father when he found out about our abilities. And now you are on a battlefield, reanimated from the to fight me. Haku. But I thought, you thought I would at the hands of father like you. No, I killed him and his mob. And then I lived alone and for the longest time. Now, I know you feel the urge to fight me. So fight me. I'm not afraid. After my family was I was trained under one of the greatest shinobi of his time. Haku launched forward, the dragon moving alongside him, as a smooth spear of ice formed in his hand. His mother dodged as he tried to impale her. She moved around to dodge his attacks before placing the palm of her hand against the ground. Spires of ice shot up out of the ground. Haku had his dragon form a protective sphere around him. She watched as the sphere opened only to surprise her to be empty. She then looked down at her as Haku's spear was sticking out from where her heart would be. Haku's voice growled from behind her. Sumika Yuki, you have failed this world. As you failed me all those years ago. Haku. Father came after us both and what did you do? He the spear from her and parried the downward swing of a blade of ice Sumika brought down at him. Haku backed off a moment. You begged him to spare you and I so we could live our peaceful life. But from that day, even if he had let you live, it would only have been a peaceful lie. You laid yourself down before him, but we could both see in his eyes he was never going to spare us. I had to kill him with you gone. I had to suffer alone. Sumika rushed in and went to Haku as he formed a shield of ice on his arm, blocking the attack. I'm so sorry. I never meant for that to happen. Sumika said, each of them struggling against the other. I only wanted us to live peacefully. That's why I didn't want you to ever show someone your abilities. It is far too late for that. I know, but at least now I can do everything to keep you alive. Behind you. Haku's moved up into the air, jumping onto his ice dragon just as waves of ice crystals drove into Sumika, crushing everything in their path. He landed a few yards away and crouched with a new spear in hand and his dragon behind him. He then watched, astonished, as his mother reformed, not by the ashes these zombies would normally. She reformed from her ice crystals. As her face reformed, a large portion of her body remained as crystals. There was one thing I always wished I could have told you. The reason I craved a peaceful life so much was because I was a monster during the war. I was a living weapon, able to crystallize my entire body and reform it at will. I could even melt some of the parts and get into the enemy's drinking supply to freeze and kill them from the inside. I was one of the most powerful members of our clan. Haku looked stunned a moment before smiling and laughing. Then you'll give me a challenge. Don't think you were the only one to become powerful. I found plenty of records on the Hushu Oni. The ice crystal demon. I just never thought it was you. I'm glad to know my skills in studying RB came from somewhere. As he said this, his arms disintegrated into shards of ice. Full body deconstruction is still outside my abilities, but I've still come a long way in other areas. Demonic mirroring ice crystals. A massive dome of mirrors formed over them. Not only did Sumika notice that the mirrors were larger than usual, but she was rather shocked to see something else. 2, 4, 8. There are 42 mirrors here. Sumika said. Not 21. How can you maintain so many mirrors in such a smooth dome? Even I could only hold 30, and they were never stable for long. As I said before, I have come a long way in other areas. But it gets even better. He stepped into one of the mirrors, his dragon dissolving into his arms, before the dome started gyrating. Each row was spinning in a different direction. Now then, let's see who is stronger, mother. Break. Black Zetsu, using Madara's body as his own, sat within the cave. In front of him was a body in the center of a ceiling array. It was the body he had using the Rinnegan on the Jinchuriki. With the other bee surrounding the one in the center, once enough chakra was amassed, it would also be his tool to reviving Madara. He then looked to his left, seemingly into nothing. So he did leave Obito in a zoo. I guess it's a good thing I sent another army there ahead of me. But soon enough I'll need to go myself. There is no way that an army of Zetsu and a few zombies can do everything I need done. That's going to be a bit difficult to do, even for you. Naruto said as he walked into the atrium of the cave. Kureo and Kagari were beside him. And why is that? Zetsu asked. Because those fortresses giving your army so much trouble. Those things are mobile. Break. Obito stood at the end of the main cannon of one of the fortresses around the island nation of Azu. From the reports they were getting, an army of Zetsu were on their way. He knew that right about now the rest of the army would be making contact with Black Zetsu's main force. This was why he was here. To defend the village. Masamune, you ready? Obito asked through the device in his ear. Date Masamune, standing on the beaches with a small army. I failed to protect this nation before. I won't do so again. Good to know. You're about to get your chance. Obito then jumped down onto the deck of the fortress and started shouting orders. Ready the main cannon. Maximize output in that first shot and then keep up a constant barrage with the main cannon and the other guns. Send these orders to the other fortresses. And to the fortresses on the other side of the island with no clear shot, tell them to begin the next phase early. We need them ready. Without warning, several Zetsu burst out of the water and landed on the deck of the fortress. They took down one of the guards before Obito opened a portal back into the ocean in its sea. As each one fell over, more jumped on. Time to accelerate the plan. Fire down into the water. Activate the trump card protocol. Obito yelled. Every Zetsu on board stopped moving as the fortress shook. And then it started rising out of the water. Break. Tayuya swung her staff, hitting Ginkaku in the face. He simply shrugged it off and grabbed her wrist. The Azu 5 had been struggling against these two brothers, constantly needing to retreat to avoid attacks, and being unable to communicate properly as most of them were unsure of their own most used word. They all had to use caution in a battle that to use too much caution would cost them. Kinkaku was about to bring his fist down on Sakin. That fist, instead, collided with the flat of a pitch-black broadsword. Kinkaku. Ginkaku. It has been quite some time. The brothers looked up at the one holding the sword, though Kinkaku recognized the blade and was already feeling the fear growing. Oh Okiai. Ginkaku stammered out. Okiai smiled. Miss me. He barely moved the sword as it easily through Kinkaku, leaving seals behind as it went. The seals engulfed the gold brother. Ginkaku tried to move to help his brother, but a large fist came down and crushed him. Douglas used a small sealing tag to wrap the body in tendrils that sprouted from the ground. You're Okiai? Tayuya asked. I guess I should thank you. No, you should get back to battling this army. Okiai said. Okiai then waved to Shina and Douglas to follow him as he rejoined the rest of the 8. Crow and Kichigai had broken off to fight in different areas. He stood next to his 7 friends. Even while he hadn't known some of them very well, like Douglas and Skull, he was glad to fight beside them. He remembered the last time he had fought beside Shina, Douglas, Balalaika, and Genkaku. Now it will happen again. My friends, let us fight together again. Okiai said. I have waited long for this day. Shina mumbled. Douglas laughed. We will fight with you once more. Balalaika sneered. Been a while since I saw this part of you. Welcome back, boss. Okiai smiled. It's good to be back. Now that all 5 of us are together, it's time we go to the depths of hell itself. Skull looked up and noticed that stray balls of fire had caused clouds to accumulate and rain to start falling. He hummed to himself as he felt a dark shadow form behind him. He knew no one else could see it, but the form it took made him happy he alone felt it. He took comfort in its presence. Looking up, he mumbled to himself. It's raining B. Is she crying? Do not cry my dear, for we shall be together again soon. Returning his gaze to the battlefield, he drew a thin and long blade from his back. The handle was red with a pure black jewel as the guard. The blade itself was silver with strange carvings along the blade. He dodged a punch from one of the many Zetsu and went to it in 2 before a burst of air fired through its head. He turned to see Genkaku smirking with the 2 mechanisms from his divided guitar in each hand. Before Skull could say thanks, Genkaku spun around to fire at many of the Zetsu as they closed in. Skull swung his sword in a long arc, kicking up dirt and dust into the eyes of some of the enemies. He jumped up and kicked one in the face before turning to another and them in the sea. As the creature doubled over, Skull was unable to get the sword out as he was forced to dodge a kunai flying through the air by spinning over the Zetsu he had. He spun around over its back and rolled off. As his feet reconnected with the ground, he spun to punch a reanimated core in the face, then taking its weapon and another Zetsu in the Another C came at him with a sword. He grabbed this one's wrist and twisted it, using the sword to defend against the blade of the first one. With the first one deflected, he twisted around and the C with his own blade. Before he could apply a sealing tag, he had to duck beneath the blade of the first once again. He spun it around and it in the face. The second one came behind him and grabbed him as the first turned around and tried to bring an axe down on him. He twisted out of the grip, allowing the axe to bite into the shoulder of the second core rather than his own He turned to the first which he head-butted and kneed in the belly. He shoved the first away in time to use his own wrist to knock away the wrist of a third C that tried to bring a sword down on him. He punched this third one in the face, placing a sealing tag on its chin. The second came from behind and tried to him, only to have its wrist broken as his sword was twisted and jammed into his own He finally placed a tag on the second and dodged just in time to duck under the first sword and get in close. He gripped the first skull and applied another sealing tag. It was as the three fell that he realized the Zetsu weren't moving on him. Of course. They can see her power guiding me. Making me war incarnate, he thought to himself. He shot forward, grabbing one Zetsu by the end, twisting the end and throwing the body at some of the others, chuckling to himself as he went. He stopped and took a few moments to look at the other immortals. They were all distracted. Skull grabbed his sword and started weaving through the crowds and headed towards his new targets. My dearest, we shall be together again. Soon. 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 Break. Naruto went to press his fist into the ground where Zetsu once stood, angered that he was unable to destroy the body with the Rinnegan. The body protected by an extremely powerful barrier. He would need to bring Black Zetsu down first. As Madara's body was directed, Naruto jumped to the side to avoid a massive undulating sword. Kagari formed his Susanoo as armor around him as well as a large arm to grab Madara's blade. Kureo cackled like a maniac as his wooden armor sprouted weapons from each hand. From his right was a massive spinal structure schooled together by roots with spikes coming out of each segment and the end. The one on the left was a 4-petal flower structure. Naruto rushed in with his sword and nearly impaled Zetsu when his Susanoo flared to life, forming another sword that S into the roof of the cave, bringing it down. Each of the three formed their own defenses as Zetsu started gathering up chakra. It's time I went to Azu to get back what you and Obito have been keeping from me. Zetsu said. Naruto burst through some of the rubble. You destroyed a part of my home before. I won't be absent again. He said, grabbing onto Zetsu just as he disappeared in a shunshin. Kagari and Kureo finally uncovered themselves and looked around. What the hell was that? Kureo asked. I'm not sure. Kagari said. Let's go find out. They each then pulled out a Hiraishin kunai and got ready to jump to Naruto when a voice halted them. You mind taking me with you? Kichigai asked, appearing above them in the hole in the ground. Break. Date S threw several Zetsu as he weaved around to avoid the six-legged fortress as it moved over the beach. He had each of his blades in between his fingers. As an explosion from one of the fortresses, forcing him to back up. He backed up into Obito, leaving them back to back as they used their respective blades to fight off multiple enemies. Obito opened a portal in or underneath several Zetsu. He decided to have some fun with the physics of it all by opening two of his wormholes directly above each other, causing the Zetsu to rapidly build speed before sending them flying into a different direction. Date fist bumped him as he laughed and went back to his own enemies. He s the blades on his right hand through the sea of one of the Zetsu and began using the body as a shield. Once the fragile body began to fall apart, he threw it at one that was getting too close. Shinra Tensei. All at once, there was a massive explosion that even the Zetsu had to brace for. One of the fortresses that had been moving was unable to find purchase in time and was knocked off its feet. Obito's face faltered. Oh crap. What is it? Date asked. Black Zetsu just appeared. And Naruto's not only with him, he's pissed. Break. After they had appeared in the air above Azu and Zetsu used Shinra Tensei. Black Zetsu went to place his hand on Naruto to extract Kurama. Naruto laughed. He pulled a kunai out before they disappeared and reappeared back on the main battlefield, though several thousand feet in the air. This time, you get nothing. Naruto said. Even if I still have Kinkaku and Ginkaku. Zetsu said. I guess so. Oh well. Lucky me, I can slow you down. Naruto's body exploded with fire as several explosive tags went off. As the smoke cleared, Zetsu looked down at the rapidly approaching ground. Zetsu turned as the body repaired to see Naruto falling. I forgot to tell you, Zetsu. I have my own secret for immortality. He then grabbed Zetsu and disappeared again, this time reappearing above the desolate land where Iwa once was. Why here? Zetsu asked. Naruto activated his shroud, wings, tails, and armor all forming around him. Why? Because the level of destruction we are about to inflict upon this land will be more than my people can take. Zetsu's Susanoo activated, quickly advancing it into its perfect form. I must ask, where did that immortality of yours come from? Zetsu asked. You really don't know much, do you? I expected more from someone who has observed so much. Naruto said before charging in, using his shroud clash swords with Zetsu's Susanoo. The counter failed as his opponent jumped backwards to avoid further damage. Zetsu chuckled. I have a life outside of you. Be that as it may, you didn't have a life outside the Sage of Six Paths and his family. After all, I thought you would have known that one of my techniques is entirely based on an attempt at immortality. The shadow clone. I never did like my dependence on it. That's why I've been spending so long to make it all but worthless to me. But the years have made one thing very clear. I can't deny the results. What are you talking about? Zetsu asked, genuinely curious now. Naruto's shroud opened its maw and started building up a Biju Dharma. You about ready, Kurama? Naruto asked in his mindscape. Ready, Kit. Just give the word. There have always been records of the sage's power, one such being what Nagato would one day call the Six Paths of Pain. Naruto said as the Biju Dharma grew in size. Orochimaru also had a spark from this jutsu the day he came to a theory no one else had considered. A theory he would one day find was correct. The old sage once tried his hand at immortality so that he could contain the Juubi for all time, rather than set it loose upon the world at his death. He thought that by exerting his will upon these he could outlast, or perhaps even preserve his own. He clearly failed. That he did, but not before setting in play what would become the basis of my continued existence. As it so happens, should someone ever be able to amass enough chakra and then move so much of that chakra into a clone, so much that it leaves them on the verge of death, then that clone essentially becomes a second body. But that verge of death part is a problem. Only someone who is a Jinchuriki, or has been affected by enough Biju chakra that they gain healing abilities near that of a Jinchuriki, can survive without suffering from heart failure after a few minutes. This death makes the technique pointless to have. These clones, when are used to help you reincarnate yourself. In a manner of speaking, chakra is the manifestation of both physical and spiritual energy, yes. When a person the spiritual separates from the physical, going who knows where. But, if you have a clone stocked with a strong enough amount of your own physical and spiritual energy, it acts as a sort of tether, allowing your remaining spiritual energy to reconnect with that of the clone. This essentially allows for me to move when and as soon as my actual self enters the clone, it becomes as real as my own body. Actually, I should be able to do the same should I store enough of my chakra into something like a puppet or such, the same thing would work. In theory anyways. There is already a glaring weakness to that. Yes there is. It is not only easy for the clones to be destroyed before I take them over, but only so many can be produced in a set amount of time. Should I be past that number, there is no coming back. Then all I have to do is keep KU. You can try. Naruto shouted before firing his Biju Dharma. Break. Han ran across the battlefield, steam trailing behind him as he took down Zetsu left and right. One of them went for his shoulder to try and absorb his chakra before a golden spear flew through its sea. It looked down before the spear turned to dust that collected within its body and then expanded outward. As the Zetsu Han looked over at Gaara who was controlling several limbs of sand and other materials to toss around several of the creatures. He was about to thank the Kazekage before gold dust destroyed the area. Looking over to another area, he realized he needed to keep moving rather than get caught in a family matter between Gaara and his father. He charged forward and laughed as some of the Zetsu tried to get out of his way. He threw a single punch that went through 4 of them at once. As one was sent through the air by an explosion, he grabbed it by the leg and punched it into the ground. The furnace on his back fired off jets of steam into the Zetsu behind him. As destruction went across the field, Han took inventory of the changes in the landscape and all the walls and other defensive barriers that had been brought up from the ground. He then turned his attention to new opponents. Several reanimated sea went after him before he punched one, sending it flying through the air. He then punched another one in the gut before spinning it around and kicking it towards a third. The second, still moving from the momentum of the kick, wound up headbutting the third in the groin. The third let out a yelp of pain before trying to warn the second. The second turned around just in time for Han to crash into them, his steam fueling his speed. The first finally regenerated and picked himself up. He looked over at Han fighting the other two before running off. Forget this. I need to find a bigger weapon, he said. As they got back up, the third one ducked under a large rock Han sent flying at him, allowing it to crash into the second. The third fired of a storm of small fireballs that Han easily rolled forward to avoid. Just as the second one got back to his feet, Han grabbed them both by the N and S their heads together. He punched the second in the C, turned to the third to punch him in the face, and then kicked the second off to the side. He landed a barrage of punches onto the third's S and C, even bringing a first down on his head. He then kneed him, sending him to the ground. The third tried to stop him as he went to punch him in the groin. He shouted in pain again, grabbing his groin, before getting kicked into a nearby mud wall. Han then ducked down as an explosive tag attached to a kunai went flying over his head. He turned to see the first standing there with rocks covering most his arm and a giant stone sword in his hand. "Remember me?" he asked. "Now step away from the idiots." Han moved to attack but ducked again as the second threw a punch. He grabbed the second's wrist and broke the arm. "OS," the second said before being kicked into the air. "OS," he shouted. The first came in, swinging his sword across to try and get Han, who easily dodged. He tried to S across several times before trying AS. Han grabbed his wrist as the S went by, disarming the first and then kicking him away and into the other two. "Bullshush," the first shouted as he was sent stumbling off, getting C off as his face hit the ground. Han was quickly over to the three as they were still trying to recover. One was up and tried to S him with a kunai, but failed as a sealing tag was placed on his arm. The other two were picked up by their N and then sealed. Before he could continue on, Han was forced to dodge a stream of magma. As the smoke and smell of slag S down, Han looked around and was both stunned and saddened by the source. "Roshi." Roshi said nothing as he lunged forward to attack. Han dodged a punch to grab Roshi's wrist and flip him over, embedding him into the ground. It was then that he noticed something off. Roshi's eyes. The Rinnegan. Break. Kabuto ran through the caves, constantly closing up passages with his inorganic reincarnation. Each time the passage was closed, a Kaiten Jutsu would reduce the block to slag, opening the way yet again for Orochimaru and Anko. Orochimaru was tired of chasing Kabuto, choosing the next open area in the cave to block off the only other entrance. Triple Rashomon. Two of the walls blocked the cave Kabuto was about to run into, the third blocking the way they had come. Kabuto flipped and landed on the Rashomon in front of him. He opened his mouth wide and expelled a dragon of light with an orb in one claw. Orochimaru and Anko stopped. Orochimaru tossed Anko a pair of earplugs and a small hypodermic needle. "Put those in, keep your eyes closed, and use the needle to ignore the pain." Anko did as she was told just before the jutsu went off. Blinding light and deafening noise went off, crippling vibrations pulsed through the air, each stopping her for a moment. Regardless of the tools given, Anko was unable to move for a moment as the pain dulled. She had her snake's relay signals to her due to the noise and light blocking her senses of sight and hearing and the pain blocking her sense of touch. She regained her movement a moment too late as she moved to block Kabuto's chakra scalpel aimed for her N. Kabuto was shocked as a massive snake bit his arm and redirected it. "How are you able to maintain all your senses in this?" Kabuto asked. "I was the one who gave you the notes on that jutsu. Don't think I wasn't prepared to handle it." Orochimaru responded. He charged in, coughing up the sword of Kusanagi as he went. A blade of bone formed from Kabuto's palm, swung to the side to parry Orochimaru's blade. Anko, though her moves were slightly slower than usual, used several snakes to bind Kabuto for a moment. Dance of the Lark. Bones shot out of Kabuto's body, shredding the snakes. He moved around and nearly tore into Anko before Orochimaru pushed her out of the way. They retreated to dodge the strikes for a few moments before Orochimaru created a large barrier of mud. He turned to Anko. "Do you still have that curse seal?" he asked. "I was never able to activate the version 2, but I told Naruto to let me keep it. Figured it would be useful for the war." "Smart girl. The reason you never activated the version 2 was because I never got the chance to send actual nature energy into the seal. Come here." Kabuto broke through the wall before a massive tail S him back through it. He got over his shock and looked up a moment to see the tail shake, rattling the keratin at the end. Break. The sphere kept gyrating, allowing Haku to move between mirrors even faster. This was even more useful as his mother was easily destroying his mirrors and dodging his attacks. All at once he escaped from the back of one mirror before having them all move in at blinding speeds to try and crush her. Before she could recover, he formed an immense dragon of ice. As she burst from the ice, she looked up to see the dragon flying straight down to swallow her. It crashed into the ground as its jaws shut. Within seconds, the entire structure exploded in a storm of crystals. I don't want this to be true, Haku, but you can't beat me, she said as she emerged from the crystals. Not without he responded while dodging her attacks. He brought up several spires of ice before kicking one, sending most of it flying at her. She easily knocked it away before Haku rushed in. Zabuza, who had finally managed to defeat the previous ninja swordsman, landed nearby, ready to help Haku should he need it. Haku launched his own crystals into his mother's, distorting her formation a moment. He used the opening to appear in front of her and place the palm of his hand on her forehead. Ice started spreading throughout her body before exploding outward, consuming them both. Zabuza, realizing what was happening, tried to rush forward and stop it. No, Haku, what are you doing? Zabuza shouted. Haku turned the slightest amount he could as the ice still shifted. He looked at Zabuza and smiled. Thank you for everything, Zabuza. Good luck, Haku thought to himself as he began to lose consciousness. Before losing consciousness entirely to the medium he had imprisoned them in, he activated the sealing array Naruto gave him and sealed them both. Sealed them both within a frozen prison. Zabuza ran forward and tried into the ice with his sword only to have no success. He his blade into the ice, trying to break it with no success. He then threw the blade to the side and started pounding on the ice with his bare hands as tears started falling from his eyes. Haku, why? Break. Han stood in a small triangle with Utakata and Gaara, the 5 missing Jinchuriki surrounding them. Utakata and Han had helped Gaara with his father when they had the chance, knowing they needed his help with what they were dealing with. How are we supposed to stop them? Utakata asked. I'm not sure. We have to be systematic about this. Gaara said. I'll distract the others. You two seal B and we'll keep working on it. That sounds like it works, but I've got some questions. Are you going to be able to keep that up? Han asked. Don't worry about me. Just get it done. And my other question. How do they have those eyes? Obito said that was part of the plan should they have trouble with some of the Jinchuriki, but who's using them? It doesn't matter right now. Let's get this over with. Utakata replied. Han charged at B and his shoulder into him. Gaara formed several large arms of his metals and started using them to grab and throw the Jinchuriki. He trapped them in sand coffins to stall for time. Utakata fired a stream of acid at B. Han was about to punch down into where Roshi's skull was when he heard an agonized scream. He turned to see Gaara fighting back against someone he didn't recognize. Before he lost consciousness, he heard only a few words. It's time we were reunited. A dark voice said from behind him. Now all that is left is to make sure Naruto doesn't seal away Madara and to get the statue. Break. Naruto, his shroud knocked down, raised the arms of his shroud to block Madara's sword as it came down, but was surprised when the blow never landed. He looked up to see Kichigai standing on the snout of the shroud, a 6-tailed form of the Kyuubi's chakra wrapped around him. Kichigai strained to use his tails to keep the sword from crashing down. Hey there, mind lending me some more of the furball's chakra? What was left in this clone's body isn't much. Naruto smirked. Never expected to be fighting alongside you. The shroud brought one of its tails around and it into Madara's Susanoo. As Zetsu was forced back, Naruto's shroud connected with Kichigai. Within moments, as Kichigai's form grew larger, there stood the form of the Kyuubi with Kichigai's eyes in the place of its own. As Kichigai moved to the side, Naruto's shroud stood up and drew its swords, ready to do battle against Zetsu. Ready, Kichigai? Naruto asked. As I'll ever be. Don't you two forget about us. Kagari shouted as his Susanoo grew to massive proportions. He was now standing to the left of Naruto and Kichigai. The ground exploded with trees as a large wooden form grew from vines and trees themselves. The form to shape into a large version of Kureo's wood armor, though with slight changes. Did you really think it was that easy to ditch us? Kureo asked. Not a chance. Naruto smiled. Glad you two were able to catch up. Now let's get going. 4 against 1. I wonder how those odds will work out. Zetsu said to himself. Naruto charged in, bringing his sword in for a low blow. Zetsu braced for it, but was unprepared for the sword to dig into the ground and kick sand and dirt into the air, blocking his view for a moment. Zetsu's Susanoo was brought to the ground as Kichigai's form impacted the front of it. Kichigai tried to claw away at the armor of the Susanoo before Zetsu used one of the forearms to lift him up slightly and then kick him away. He moved out of the way as Kagari's sword into the ground where his head used to be. He then jumped into the air and landed on his feet and used one of his swords to parry a blow from Kureo's avatar. Kagari's his sword, tearing up some of Zetsu's Susanoo, destabilizing it for a moment before Zetsu regained his senses. Kichigai went to attack before Zetsu grabbed him and flipped him over. Kureo started wrapping the Susanoo in vast roots and vines. Zetsu spent a few moments trying to tear away the wood before raising his swords in an X to block Naruto's sword. Kagari see through Zetsu's Susanoo and grabbed what was left of the destabilized ethereal warrior and brought it to the ground. Kichigai came back around and opened the jewel Zetsu was standing it, leaving him exposed for a moment as Naruto came down and exited his shroud, landing right next to Zetsu. Zetsu tried to punch him but the hand was off. Before it could reform, Naruto went to into Zetsu's head. Naruto's eyes widened as his blade was stopped, blocked by the blade of a man who was not his target. I recognize you, Naruto said. You were with Oki. There was a sigh. That's right. I'm truly sorry about this, but I can't allow you to stop Zetsu. This plan, the infinite Tsukuyomi, will reunite me with the woman I loved. And we shall be reunited. Soon. Naruto pushed forward with his blade, trying to gain the upper hand. What are you talking about, Skull? If you actually think that Jutsu will reunite you with someone then you're delusional. Skull chuckled darkly. No, you young fool. I'm the only one who's correct. Naruto felt his body moving backward before the pain registered. The pain of Skull's foot connecting with his sea and sending him flying into the air. His shroud formed around him, driving its blade down to where Black Zetsu and Skull were standing. Zetsu dissolved his Susanoo and moved out of the way while Skull simply angled his body so that only the upper right portion of his torso was off. Skull moved away from where the sword was, creating the opening needed for bone to construct before filling with vessels and being covered in muscle and skin. All of it happening in mere seconds. What was left of his shirt slipped away to reveal a pale and heavily scared body. Naruto grabbed his head in agony as the ethereal blade started falling apart. Kit, you have to stop him. Kurama shouted within Naruto's mind. I don't know what he did, but a portion of my chakra didn't just go away. It ceased to exist. I might have an idea about who he is, but you need to pray I'm wrong. What do you mean? What is he? Whatever he is, what he's done is going to leave you without me for a while. And you should know that even if I'm wrong, he's older than I am. Suddenly the shroud disappeared and Kurama went silent. Naruto shifted his focus from Kurama's chakra and focused instead on his sage chakra to keep him in the air. All of the other Jinchuriki are taken care of and in the cave. You will find Kinkaku and Ginkaku there as well. Skull told Zetsu. What about the statue? We still need it. Black Zetsu replied. Skull tossed him a small jar with 2 eyes floating in them. I already took care of things. I would have given you the statue itself if not for obvious reasons. Good. Remove his seals from me and I'll get going. Bijudama barrage. Kichigai fired of 4 of the unfocused spheres of chakra only for them to suddenly disperse into clouds of ash. It will take more than that to K me. Or less depending on your view of things. Skull stated. He placed his hand on Zetsu's shoulder, producing a dark flash of light. Now go, Zetsu. We have a jutsu to activate. Black Zetsu disappeared just as Kagari, now in his smaller Susanoo, crashed into the spot he had been in moments ago. We need to get back to the battle. Naruto said, landing next to Kagari. I'm afraid I can't allow that to happen. Skull mumbled to himself before a pulse of energy passed over the area harmlessly. I will not allow you to stop what must be done. I will not let you stop it. Naruto looked at his arms and down at himself for a moment, not feeling any different. What was that supposed to do? He asked. You will find that you can no longer access larger amounts of chakra. I am, however, a fair player in any game. The rules are simple. The effects are temporary, you can still use the chakra to move as quickly as normal and for your sons to form weapons. But, you should know that if you try to flee, I will tighten the hold on your power. The only way you can leave is to succeed in K-me. In which case, you should know that there is only one way to K me. Only one part of me that doesn't regrow. Ironically enough, discovering that weakness is the cause of all my sorrow. Skull finished before placing his forefinger in the center of his forehead, using his other hand to grip his sword. Destroy this cause of so much suffering and you shall own victory. Now, have at thee. Break. Kabuto leaped back, avoiding the rattling tail once again before its source finally came out of the hole in the wall. The lower body was entirely made of serpent, the long, 20-foot tail made up of red, blue, and black scales. The upper body showed some of the less drastic, but drastic nonetheless, changes in Anko's form. She still had her trench coat and other upper body clothing, though her arms and fingers had become longer and somewhat thinner, long and sharp nails protruding from the ends of her fingers. Other changes were that, while the ponytail remained normal, the rest of her hair had turned into snakes that stretched down past her shoulders. Hien had become longer, even stretching somewhat to give a hood shape. Her face had also elongated to give a more reptilian appearance. Kabuto marveled at the sight. Sir Orochimaru was right. Your affinity for snakes mixed with your curse seal gave you quite the form. Anko hissed at him, her jaw stretching wide for arms to shoot out and grab her jaws. Suddenly her entire form grew pale and dry before the arms propelled an exact replica of her at Kabuto. In his shock, he hardly escaped her closing more, and even more narrowly her rattling tail. Quite impressive. If not for that rattle, your tail might have gotten me. Kabuto taunted. One of the many flaws Orochimaru was responsible for. Anko hissed. But you know all about that, don't you? She asked with a taunting smirk winding up her features. I am not a flaw. I am the perfection he couldn't achieve. Anko was surprised as Kabuto appeared above her, bringing his leg down toward her skull. The leg was then twisted with a series of sickening pops before Kabuto went flying through the air as Orochimaru countered. Don't underestimate him. He's more powerful than the two of us currently are and it will take cunning to defeat him. Orochimaru said to Anko. I know. I just wasn't expecting him to lash out so quickly or bluntly. She responded. They then shared a look as a plan instantly fell together. I know, they each said. Orochimaru moved in quickly and tried to punch Kabuto in the face. The snake coming out of Kabuto's gut wrapped around Orochimaru's arm, flipping him over and into a wall where he exploded into a splatter of mud. He turned around just as a fist connected with his cheek, sending him towards a pillar, in which he was embedded. His body formed into a liquid, flowing to the ground where he reformed and stood back up. I had forgotten your prowess with mud jutsu, Lord Orochimaru. Even being able to give it a pulse to fool anyone looking for it. Kabuto said. You didn't forget, Kabuto. You were just a failure when it came to those jutsu. Unable to ever catch them. Orochimaru retorted. Those mud clones of yours could fool even your old teammates. Even the other Sannin and any cage. I'm no failure. He charged toward his former teacher, going in low only to disappear and show up above Orochimaru. The Sannin had been blocking low, only for a downward kick to embed him into the ground. With Orochimaru's body broken and trying to reform, Kabuto turned his attention to Anko. So you can kick really hard. Not impressed. Anko hissed. Not impressed. I am perfect. You'll s by my hand. Kabuto shouted. His body suddenly liquefied and sank into the ground. Inorganic reincarnation. Pillars around the cave split and tried to crush Anko. She got close to the ground and started S between each pillar as it came down, digging her claws into the ground to help redirect her motions. She moved to dodge another only for Kabuto to materialize in front of her. Kabuto's snake went in to bite her and only for her cough up another form of herself and keep moving, leaving only a husk for the snake to sink its fangs into. His surprise at her actions broke his concentration on the inorganic reincarnation, causing much of the living rock to break off and fall to the ground. Anko grabbed the hide of her old body and moved quickly to use it before it was little more than paper, twisting the tail around the snake. She then pulled hard on the skin, sending Kabuto flying towards the cave wall. The snake turned to fluid and slipped from the skin wrapped around it, allowing Kabuto to reorient himself and land safely against the wall. There was an explosion of stone, a flurry of white snakes wrapping around Kabuto, and suddenly the student was pinned to the wall by his teacher. You should still be regenerating. Kabuto shouted. How? Am I already up again? Orochimaru finished as he stepped from behind a pillar. Anko, begin. Anko chuckled. With pleasure. Her jaw became slack, allowing a thin green mist to start flowing out and building up around the cave, intensifying in output with each passing second. I might never have given him credit before, but out of the three who can use it, Naruto is by far the most efficient. You were my own student, yet he has surpassed you in the jutsu which you surpassed me in. I'm unimpressed once again. Kabuto growled in anger. I am perfection. Bones are through the snakes, spinning around and then forming a massive torrent that easily impaled Orochimaru and left him affixed to the ground. As the bones released themselves from Kabuto's body, he brushed off some of the remaining snake entrails from his shoulder. He turned to Anko and breathed in deeply. You thought that a simple toxin, as lethal, complex, and effective as your choice might be, would be of any use to you against me. I can breath it deep within my lungs and see every component. Anko's jaw hefted back into place with a crunch. Show off your perfection and fall. Breath it as deep as you please, it will be more effective. And clearly not as perfect as you like, considering you aren't shocked by my own special ingredient. Kabuto looked at her strangely. Special ingredient? What the hell? Anko loved the shock on his face as she struck her upper fangs against her lower ones, sparking the air and igniting the toxin. The blaze burned into the cave rapidly, burning at such high degrees that the bone impaling Orochimaru began to melt. Kabuto tried to close off most of his orifices but was unable to stop some of it from getting in and igniting a portion of his lungs. Even his healing wound destruction was only able to stop a portion of the damage to the afflicted area. Kabuto spit up a bit of I'm going to K you for that. Break. Naruto brought his sword down, Skull merely dodging for the blade to hit the ground. Skull easily danced around the weapons of the others, using his own sword to parry blows, though never able to land any of his own. This is going nowhere. I love the finesse of this blade, so must I really fall to my more brutal and direct style? Skull thought to himself. So be it. Zetsu, my blade, if you will. Skull said, backing off from the others. A white material bubbled up from Skull's back, forming an arm with a brutal-looking axe sword in hand. Skull traded swords with the hand before it disappeared. Am I to assume that you being covered in Zetsu spores is how you were able to get to this place form the main battlefield? Naruto asked. It is. Skull answered. But the time for talk is over. Skull jumped into the air, moving towards Naruto. While mid-air, several red arrows of light flew into him, exploding on contact. Skull's body was sent flying into the ground, but as the smoke cleared he stood there unharmed. Kagari lowered his arms, the ethereal bow fading. That didn't do anything to him, he mumbled. I know we need to go for his head, but how are we supposed to stop this guy? Kagari, watch out, Kureo shouted, knocking Kagari out of his thoughts. Skull flashed out of existence, destroying the ground with the speed of his reappearance next to Kagari with his sword raised and ready to K. The blade came down only for Kureo to block with a massive double-edged sword made from condensed wood. Kureo parried the blow to the side and spun, forcing Skull to block. The block only did so much, as the force behind Kureo's counter sent him flying backwards. As Skull landed with a heavy thud, Kureo charged in, ducking under a downward swing from Skull's blade and stepping to the side as the axe sword destroyed the ground. Skull R his sword free in and diagonal S at Kureo, who ducked again and tried to strike. Skull immediately redirected his force to parry Kureo's attack, breaking his arm in the process of the defense, though it healed almost instantly. Their blades clashed again, and again, and again, and again. In one powerful downward S, Skull forced Kureo back. Kureo did a double take, noticing his sword was cracked and ready to give way. Someone take over while I form a new blade. Kureo shouted, dodging a skull-crushing attack from Skull. Skull, his arm already regrowing, used the opportunity to try attacking again, going after Naruto as he started retreating. Naruto parried the blade and spun around, delivering a savage kick to Skull's jaw, hearing a crunch of bone but noticing no damage to the skull he wore. Naruto backed off for a moment. When you go for his head, put in as much force as you can. That skull he wears is reinforced somehow, he said before returning to the offensive. Skull, his jaw already repaired, brought his sword down only for Naruto to back off at the last second. His sword was embedded into the ground, leaving Naruto a small opening. Naruto brought his foot down, forcing the sword deeper into the earth. Standing on the blade, he brought his own sword in from his side, a clear shot to Skull's head. Seeing the sword coming, Skull let go of his blade and bent over backwards to avoid the danger. He flipped back, a leg extending to kick Naruto in the face or see, only for it to be dodged. Naruto moved back as Skull twisted, placing a hand on the ground to support his kick from below. Naruto blocked the kick with the flat of his sword, being forced back even more as Skull continued the assault, twisting and kicking with the intent of at least breaking something, if not dealing permanent damage. A kick landed on Naruto's sword with the force to send him back several yards, leaving the opening for Skull to retrieve his sword. He ran forward, crushing the ground in his wake as he went after Naruto. An arrow into his shoulder and exploded, destroying the limb, but not slowing his assault. Kichigai came in from the side, blocking the attack for Naruto, allowing him the chance to recuperate for a moment. Skull's charge forced Kichigai back. He swung the blade at an upward angle. Kichigai, though he had blocked, was sent hurtling into the air. Skull flashed above him and landed a savage strike with his sword and sending Kichigai into the ground, creating a crater at the impact. Skull appeared in the dust, hoping to finish Kichigai, only for the madness incarnate to have his opponent standing and blocking easily. Kichigai smirked as his eyes seemed to glow. Yes, I can feel it. I can feel it flowing even more powerful than before. My freedom. My insanity and power. Come on, Skull. Make me feel alive. With maniacal laughter, Kichigai abandoned his sword and grabbed Skull by the wrist. He pulled harshly, dislocating Skull's shoulder. He used the arm as leverage, swinging his body around, kicking Skull in the end, turning the foot so the sole of his shoe was pressing against where the jugular would be. He then forced the foot into the muscles of the N and twisted, tearing apart the pieces of muscle, spine, and arteries. Yes, the bee, the beautiful bee, Kichigai shouted. Naruto crashed into him, spearing his sword between the immortal's ribs. Skull shrugged it off and kicked Naruto away. The moment Naruto was out of range, Kureo's wooden flower structure wrapped around Skull. Take the shot, Kagari. Kureo shouted. Kagari reformed his bow and readied a set of 4 arrows along the string. He let them fly, each one splitting into dozens of arrows that stormed into the top of Kureo's weapon. As the flower was destroyed, they could see the arrows cover Skull's back. The moment each arrow hit its mark, they exploded in blue fire. The blast being so strong that everyone was forced to shield their eyes. It was everything was falling silent that the dust was blown away to show Skull standing there, as nonplussed as before. So this is the power of an immortal? Kichigai asked, standing up. Skull started mumbling to himself. What raw power. It's amazing that he truly is her descendant. There's slight sneer on your lips. Azetsu said as its head formed on Skull's shoulder. That look really shouldn't be shown to others. Is that what it sounds like? Indeed. Having fun, Skull? Yes, I am. I feel as though I have been reunited with an old friend. How could I not be happy? So this fight reminds you. Reminds me of the day I nearly killed the Sage of 6 Paths. Now all I can do is hope the miracle will be fulfilled and that the tree will take form this time. But first I must wait and see the result of this first clash. Now excuse me, but I have a battle to finish. Of course, the Zetsu said, fading away. Skull didn't waste another moment before charging, this time at Kureo. Kureo hefted his spinal weapon and lashed it at Skull, who knocked it to the side with his sword and jumped over it, ready to kill. Kureo released the weapon, preferring to stick to the sword as he parried Skull's attacks and moved back. He jumped into the air to avoid a low strike and twisted midair in order to get him with his sword. Skull blocked, allowing the full force of Kureo's attack to break the ground. He swung his sword down, flinging Kureo off to the side. He kept turning and in one motion used his sword to hick up dirt and large stones into Kureo's direction. Skull grabbed Naruto by the shoulders and threw him to the side. He then looked down at his wound and saw that, while the burns were going away, he had a new scar. For the first time in centuries, he had obtained a new scar. You cauterized the wound to minimize regrowth. I applaud you, but something so simple is not enough. Skull said. As impressed as he was also angry for having let them do something like this. Skull charged in, Naruto being in front of him. Naruto answered the charge in kind, his own sword brought up for an attack. He stopped mid-charge, shocking Naruto by bringing his sword down, sending a shock wave out towards his target. Naruto jumped up, avoiding most of the force and landing on merely unstable ground. He continued running, reaching Skull in a second, and impaling him in the shoulder within another. He then strengthened the grip on his blade and pulled downward, cleaving Skull nearly in half. The arrow exploded in blue flame, burning the very rock and leaving only a burning crater. As the dust and fire settled, Naruto relaxed his muscles and simply stared at the air for a moment. Zetsu, do provide me with coverings, if you would. Skull's voice said. Naruto's tensed and looked around for the source. And then he saw it. What was left of Skull's head was sprouting a new body, though clearly. Zetsu grew around him, covering his body as it formed. Within seconds, Skull was back. Skull looked around and gripped his hands, realizing they were empty. Zetsu, he stopped as he realized a portion of the skull over his head was missing. The jaw was gone entirely and the left half of his exceedingly pale face was revealed, though there was a cloth over his mouth. He growled in and stared Naruto down with his visible green eye. You would dare to desecrate what remains. You filthy curs. I shall eradicate you for this transgression. Skull flashed out of existence momentarily, the ground cracking under the force of his reappearance as he kicked Kagari in the ribs, clearly having broken several of them. He disappeared again, but Naruto tracked him momentarily, appearing in front of him in time to stop a K-blow to Kichigai. Naruto brought his sword down, only for Skull to grab it with his palms. He strained, trying to force his blade forward, Skull also straining to hold him back. Skull's hands were left empty as Naruto pulled his blade back and kicked Skull in the sea, sending him stumbling back. Skull was about to resume his attack when there was suddenly a shock wave across the ground. The sky changed color slightly and the ground shook. He turned to look into the distance. Yes, let the tree grow and unending dream of peace awaken. So very soon. A tear fell from his revealed eye as his hand moved to brush across the skull he over his head. Not today. Naruto shouted. Skull turned, remembering the need to defend. He moved too late, feeling his eye split in half along Naruto's sword as the blade dug in. He moved back, trying to avoid it, but his mind became blank as he felt something within his skull scratch against the tip of something else. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.